After minutes of silence, she finally spoke. She reminded Damien that if Ibuka rose too high, everything they had done would be exposed. She said that the boy's story would reach the village, then the elders, then the truth would come out. And when it did, their names would be dragged in the mud. She warned that, if that boy rises, your lies will scatter like ashes in the wind. Damien knew she was right. His pride was in danger. So was everything he had stolen. They made a plan. They decided to attack Martha's name first. If they could destroy her image, maybe they could kill Ibuka's momentum. Damien found the name of the education foundation that had sponsored the math competition. He wrote a letter filled with lies. In it, he claimed to be the late Emika's elder brother. He said Martha was a dangerous woman, that she had been chased out of the family for poisoning her husband, and that she raised Ibuka with stolen money. He begged them to withdraw their support before they embarrassed themselves. Auntie Rose added her own letter. She included false stories of witchcraft, theft, and curses. They paid someone to help send both letters with official-looking stamps. They smiled wickedly, thinking their work was done. But the foundation they wrote to was different. They didn't act on rumor. Instead, they began to investigate. They sent people to Abba. They spoke to teachers. They visited the school. They interviewed neighbors. They even found Mr. Ibe and asked him questions. Slowly, the truth began to unfold. They learned about Martha's struggles, about the firewood, the sickness, the eviction, the nights she slept without food just to keep her son in school. They learned how Ibuka helped others, how he tutored kids, how he spoke in churches. They heard about the fake accusations and the fire that burned her belongings. They even heard about Chief Damien's greed and how he took over the shop Emeka left behind. By the time their investigation was done, they had nothing but admiration for Martha and her son. They sent a reply to Chief Damien, a short letter. It said, "We appreciate your concern. However, after our independent review, we believe this family represents the values we stand for: resilience, integrity, and excellence. We are proud to support them." Damien never showed Rose that letter. He simply tore it into pieces and burned it in a tin plate behind his house. But the damage was already done. To him. Because just a few weeks later, another headline appeared. It read, "Ibuka Chiemeka receives international scholarship to study abroad." The article said that a prestigious science academy overseas had offered Ibuka a full scholarship, tuition, books, accommodation, and travel. A photograph showed Ibuka at the airport, standing beside a man in a suit, holding his passport and smiling at the camera. His shoes were new, his clothes fit him perfectly, and behind him stood his mother, Martha, with tears in her eyes and both hands lifted to the sky in gratitude. That image traveled far. It reached news blogs, magazines, and community WhatsApp groups. People who once believed the lies began to whisper new things. Some said Martha was a woman of grace. Others called her the silent lioness. And as for Ibuka, he was no longer just a local boy. He was now a symbol of hope, the firewood seller's son, flying out of the country with nothing but brains, prayers, and perseverance. The country Ibuka flew to was cold and far from everything he had ever known. The buildings were tall, the people walked fast, and the streets were filled with lights, cars, and strange accents. But none of these things scared him. He had faced greater storms back home. The real challenges had already shaped him: poverty, hunger, rejection, and pain. The school he entered was one of the best in the world. It had endless rows of books, smart teachers, computers that moved faster than lightning, and students from all over the globe. They all came with different talents, languages, and cultures. Yet Ibuka found his place among them. He studied computer science. From the very first day, he felt like his mind had found its perfect home. The world of numbers, codes, and machines welcomed him with open arms. He spent long hours in the computer lab, skipping meals and sleep, building systems that solved real-life problems. While some students used their free time for parties, games, and travel, Ibuka stayed focused. He read books others ignored. He attended workshops no one forced him to attend. He watched videos, followed global tech news, and asked his professors questions they were shocked he could even think of. The fire in him burned brighter than ever. In less than a year, he developed a software that could connect African villages without electricity to digital education using solar-powered devices and offline learning hubs. His idea came from his past, from the candlelight nights in Aba, from the worn-out chalkboards, from the silence of forgotten children. The first version of his idea won a Global Youth Innovation Award. It came with money, mentorship, and connections. That one idea changed everything. Soon, Ebuka launched a tech startup. He named it SolTrace, short for Solar Trace. The company focused on providing clean energy and simple technology to rural communities in Africa. He wanted to light up villages, connect schools, power clinics, and help farmers use smart tools. At first, the company was just Ebuka, a borrowed laptop, and a small office corner at the campus startup hub. But the vision was clear, and the solution was powerful. Within 1 year, investors began to notice. His software worked. His solar kits were affordable. His plan was simple and scalable. From Ghana to Kenya, from Nigeria to Rwanda, villages began to glow again. Classrooms in remote communities lit up at night. Health workers used solar-powered tools. Students had access to lessons through offline tablets. Farmers used weather tips to decide when to plant or harvest. All this because of one boy who once sold firewood. SolTrace grew quickly. It expanded beyond education and farming into health, transport, and even community security systems. In less than 3 years, the company became one of the most talked about startups across Africa. Tech blogs wrote about it. Governments invited him. International media described him as a silent genius. But through all of this, Ebuka remained hidden. He refused to grant TV interviews. He rejected magazine covers. He never showed his full name or face on his company's page. Most people knew the company. Few knew the founder. He didn't want fame. He wanted change. Only a small group of trusted people knew who he was. He told them he wanted to stay in the background, to let the work speak for itself. They respected his choice. But while the world celebrated SolTrace, only one person mattered most to Ebuka, his mother. Back in Lagos, Martha lived in a small flat near a quiet corner of town. She had left Aba quietly after Ebuka's scholarship. A church member helped her rent a room in a decent area. Ebuka sent money every month, but she never asked for more than she needed. She lived simply, ate simply, and spent her days volunteering at a nearby community kitchen. Even though her son had become one of the richest young men in Africa, Martha lived like she had when she sold firewood, humble, prayerful, and kind. She prayed for Ebuka every morning and night. She never boasted to anyone. When neighbors asked about her son, she only smiled and said, "He's doing well by God's grace." And when Ebuka visited quietly from abroad, they stayed indoors, cooked, and laughed together like the old days. No security guards, no cameras, no noise. Ebuka had secretly bought her a bigger house, but she chose to remain in her small flat. She said she would only move when she truly felt it was time. Ebuka respected her wishes. He still paid her rent, her health bills, and supported every little thing she needed. He even opened a small community library in her name, but told no one she was his mother. His love for her was private and sacred. Meanwhile, Chief Damien's life was falling apart. What once looked like a shining empire had now turned to dust. After stealing Emeka's shop, Damien had used the money to live large, buying cars, sponsoring parties, bribing politicians, and showing off in every village meeting. He built a new house, printed flyers for his new shop, and walked around with pride, calling himself Odogwu. But he lacked Emeka's wisdom and integrity. His greed blinded him. He bought fake goods, cheated customers, and refused to pay debts. Slowly, people began to avoid him. Rumors spread that his business was cursed. Old clients left. Suppliers stopped answering his calls. Banks started chasing him for unpaid loans. To make matters worse, his own children had become his greatest shame. His eldest son, once a bright boy, had dropped out of university after falling into cultism. He was now on the run, hiding from police. His second child, a daughter, got pregnant for a married man and had moved far away. The youngest, a teenage boy, was now roaming the streets, taking drugs and causing trouble. No one respected the family anymore. Damien's wife, once loud and proud, now lived in bitterness and silence. She no longer spoke in meetings. She sat at the back during family events. The joy in their home had dried up. When the business finally collapsed, the banks moved in. One by one, they seized his assets. First, they locked up the shop. Then, they took the new house he had built with stolen money. And then, his car. Soon, he was left with nothing but shame and a room in his late father's abandoned house. The same villagers he once looked down on now looked at him with pity. Some laughed behind his back. Others said it was karma. Few still greeted him with respect. His clothes became old, his shoes lost shine, his shoulders dropped, and his voice, once full of power, became low and shaky. He tried to borrow money, but nobody trusted him anymore. Even Auntie Rose, his old partner in wickedness, now avoided him. She told people she had warned him not to go too far. She acted like she had nothing to do with the lies they told about Martha. Damien sat alone many nights, staring at the wall, remembering everything. The day he chased Martha away, the fire, the insults, the lies he told in church, the fake letters, and worst of all, the headlines about Ibuka flying abroad with the world clapping. He now knew the truth. The boy he had tried to erase had become a king, and the woman he called cursed was now the mother of a global icon. But Martha said nothing. She didn't dance around the village in revenge. She didn't insult anyone. She simply prayed. She remembered the night she walked barefoot in the rain with Ibuka. She remembered the hunger, the tears, the pain. And now, she saw how God had turned ashes into beauty. Ibuka's life was proof that the truth does not need noise. It only needs time. The years had not been kind to Chief Damien. His once proud shoulders were now bent with sickness. His face, once smooth and shiny from pride, had become wrinkled and tired. He no longer walked like a lion. His steps had become slow and unsteady. Pain had become his new companion, and fear lived inside him like a shadow. It started with a mild discomfort, just a little swelling in the feet. He ignored it, thinking it was stress. But soon, the pain became unbearable. His stomach became round and hard. His face looked dark and sickly. And one morning, he collapsed while trying to stand up from his bed. His family rushed him to a nearby clinic, but the doctors shook their heads after checking him. They told him that his kidneys were failing. One had stopped working completely. The other was too weak. He needed dialysis immediately. Without it, he could die. And even if the dialysis worked for a while, the only permanent solution would be a kidney transplant. But transplants cost millions, and Damien had no money left. The once feared man of the village now had nothing, not even a shop to sell. His house had been taken by the bank. His car had been sold to pay off debt. His children had all abandoned him. The son he once praised had run away from police arrest. His daughter had married and moved far away. The last child was in rehab for drug abuse, paid for by charity. Damien sat in a small rented room, coughing, sweating, and wondering how everything had gone so wrong. He blamed many people, his wife, his children, the village, even Martha. But deep inside, he knew the truth. He was paying the price of his own wickedness. Far away from his lonely corner, another tragedy hit close to him. Auntie Rose's daughter, a young woman full of life, had gotten pregnant. The man who was responsible abandoned her, and Rose tried to manage things quietly. But the girl began to bleed heavily one night. They rushed her to a local clinic, but it was too late. She died in Rose's arms, leaving her mother broken and empty. Rose wailed for days. Her mouth, once sharp like a razor, was now filled with silence and sorrow. She sat in front of her house, unkempt, with swollen eyes and uncombed hair. Her neighbors whispered about her. Some avoided her. Others said it was karma. In her pain, she remembered the day she clapped and laughed when Martha was thrown out of Emeka's house. She remembered the words she used, the names she called her, and the fire she helped light. The memories haunted her. She went to see Chief Damien after the burial. They sat together for hours, two broken people, saying very little. Both were tired. Both were sick in different ways. As they sat, a young boy passed by with a small speaker hanging from his neck. A voice came out of the speaker, loud and clear. It was a recorded interview being played from a local YouTube show. The voice belonged to a young man, calm, intelligent, respectful. The boy turned up the volume. The speaker said, "I was raised by a woman who had nothing but gave me everything. She taught me to pray, to love, to work hard, and to never repay evil with evil. My success today is because she never gave up on me, even when the world did." Then the camera showed his face. It was Ebuka. Clean-cut, handsome, well-dressed, and glowing with peace. Behind him, the interviewer called him the silent tech billionaire behind Sol Trace. Damien sat still, blinking. Rose's mouth opened slowly. They recognized him at the same time. That was Martha's son, the boy they said would end up a beggar. Now the whole world was clapping for him. A neighbor walking past said, "Ah, that boy is something else. He even built schools and gave light to villages. And you know the sweet part? He doesn't talk too much, humble like his mother." Damien could not breathe properly. Rose stood up, shocked and confused. They stared at the screen again. The boy had become a man, and that man had become something greater than any of them could ever imagine. They sat in silence long after the interview ended. That night, Rose went to the hospital with Damien's medical papers. She asked around, trying to find out how much a transplant would cost. The answer broke her heart. They needed millions. She knew only one person could help them, Ebuka. But how would they reach him? Who would even open the door for them? They had tried to destroy him and his mother. They had written letters, told lies, laughed at their pain, and buried them in shame. And now they needed the same boy to save their lives. It took them a week to find the address of the Sol Trace headquarters in Lagos. Rose borrowed money. Damien borrowed strength. Together they traveled by night bus, with nothing but a nylon bag and their sickness. When they arrived in Lagos, the sun was already rising. The city was large, loud, and fast. Cars honked everywhere. People walked past them without care. Damien struggled to walk. Rose helped him cross the busy roads, asking strangers for direction. At last, they reached the Sol Trace office. The building was tall and shining, with glass walls and security men in black suits. The signboard read, "Sol Trace, clean energy, clear future." They stood at the gate for a long time. People walked in and out, carrying laptops and speaking into phones. Rose swallowed hard. Damien leaned on the gate, sweating heavily. They looked out of place. They looked like beggars. When they finally stepped forward and spoke to the guard, he looked at them suspiciously. They mentioned Ebuka's name and begged for a chance to speak with him. The guard made a call. They were told to wait, then wait some more. After almost an hour, a woman in a clean blue suit came out. She listened to their story with tight lips and narrowed eyes. She said nothing, then walked back in. They waited again. Finally, after a long silence, a soft voice told the guard, "Let them in." The gate opened slowly. Damien and Rose walked into the building, unsure of what would happen. They were shown into a waiting room with soft chairs and cold air. They looked around nervously, feeling small. Everyone around them looked busy, neat, and important. Minutes passed. Then the door opened. And there he was, Ebuka, tall, calm, composed. He stood at the doorway wearing a simple shirt and dark trousers. His face was surprised, but not angry. His eyes moved from Damien's weak body to Rose's worn-out face. He knew them instantly. He didn't say a word. He just stood there, breathing slowly. And then, He opened the door wider and signaled for them to speak. The room was silent. Ebuka stood by the door, his face unreadable, his eyes cold and distant. He looked at the two people sitting in his office, the same people who once watched his mother crawl out of their family home, soaked in rain, holding a hungry child with nowhere to go. Now they were here, sitting in an air-conditioned office that bore his name, the name they tried so hard to erase. Chief Damien looked older than his years. His clothes were clean but worn. His lips were dry. His body shook lightly as he sat, sweating, even in the cold room. Auntie Rose sat beside him, her face stern, her pride still hiding behind fake calmness. She shifted uncomfortably but kept her chin up, pretending she wasn't ashamed. Ebuka said nothing. He just walked over to his desk and sat down quietly, his hands folded neatly. His eyes stared ahead. Damien cleared his throat and lowered himself from the chair. Slowly, painfully, he dropped to his knees on the marble floor. His bones cracked, his body leaned forward. He bowed his head, and then he cried. Not loudly, not dramatically, but deep, slow, helpless tears. Tears that had waited years to come out. Tears of regret. Tears of guilt. He wiped his face with a handkerchief, his mouth shaking as he struggled to speak. His voice came out rough and weak, like a man who had carried too much for too long. He told Ebuka everything, how he had been jealous of Emeka's happiness, how he had always felt small next to Emeka's honesty, his peace, his quiet success. He said he had planned to take over the shop even before Emeka died. He said he felt threatened by Martha's quiet strength and by Ebuka's innocent eyes. And when Emeka died suddenly, it was like a door had opened for him to take everything, and he did. He admitted it. He took the shop. He took the house. He took the money. He took their peace. He lied to the village. He lied to the church. He lied to himself. Now he was dying. And the only person who could help him live was the boy he had once called a bastard. The same boy, he said, had no future. The same boy who now sat across from him as a global name. Chief Damien cried harder. He begged for forgiveness, not just from Ebuka, but from God. He held his stomach, wincing from pain, as he continued to speak. He said he didn't deserve mercy, but he was begging because he had no one else. Ebuka listened. His face didn't change. He stayed quiet, letting the tears of his uncle fill the room. Then, the door opened slowly. Martha entered. She had come to drop off a lunchbox for her son. She didn't expect to see those faces ever again, but there they were, right in front of her, kneeling, crying, begging. Her heart stopped for a second. She froze by the door. Her eyes moved from Damien's crying face to Rose's blank stare. Her hands trembled, but she didn't speak. Chief Damien looked up and saw her. He bowed lower, pressing his forehead to the floor. He called her name softly and begged again. He said he was sorry. He said he didn't know the boy would turn out this way. He said, "Forgive me, Martha. I didn't know he would turn out like this." That sentence cut through the air like a knife. Martha still said nothing. Her eyes glistened with quiet tears, but she didn't move. Ebuka stood up, slowly. He walked around the desk and stood near his mother. He placed a hand on her shoulder. Then he turned toward the two people on the floor. And finally, he spoke. His voice was not angry, but it was heavy. He said he had waited for this moment for years. He said that even as a boy, walking barefoot to school, he imagined what it would feel like to see his enemies beg. He said he had carried their wickedness like a stone in his heart, that every time someone called him brilliant, part of him remembered how they called him worthless, that every time he sat in class, he remembered being chased out of his home like a dog, that every time he looked at his mother's face, he saw the pain they put in her eyes. He told them how he had cried at night as a boy, wishing for his father to come back, how he had asked God why his family hated them so much, how he had spent years building his life, not for himself, but just to prove that they were wrong. Then his voice broke. He said he was tired of carrying pain, tired of pretending it didn't hurt, tired of remembering things he wished he could forget. He said he had built a company not just to succeed, but to heal. He had used pain to build light. Now, he wanted peace, but peace needed truth. Ibuka turned to Auntie Rose. She had stayed quiet through it all, but her eyes had rolled more than once. She had shifted in her chair, clearly uncomfortable, and finally, she opened her mouth. She muttered something under her breath. It was meant to be quiet, but it was loud enough for the room to hear. She said Martha was lucky, that if Amika had married another woman, maybe none of this would have happened, that not every widow deserved praise just because her son had money. Ibuka froze. Martha closed her eyes. The room went cold. Ibuka stepped forward slowly and pointed to the door, and without raising his voice, he told the guards outside to escort Auntie Rose out of the building. She laughed bitterly, stood up, dusted her wrapper, and walked out with her chin high. But everyone in the room knew what had really happened. Her pride had followed her out, but her power was gone. Ibuka sat back down. Chief Damien remained on the floor, sobbing quietly. And then, finally, Ibuka said he would help. But on one condition. It wasn't just money he wanted to give. It was the truth. He told Damien that before any money would come, before any doctor would be called, before any help would be offered, he must go back to the same village where he once lied, and tell the truth. He must confess in front of the elders, the church, and the people who believed his lies. He must return every stolen land, house, and property that belonged to Emeka. And then, he must never speak badly of Martha or Ibuka again. Ibuka promised to sponsor the transplant, cover his medical care, and even provide a place for him to recover. But only after the public confession. He said healing would begin only after honesty. Damien nodded slowly. He knew he had no choice. He had come as a beggar, and the boy he once threw away was now the one holding the key to his life. The village of Umuahia had not seen a crowd like this in many years. The elders were seated under the large Iroko tree in the village square. Their walking sticks rested beside them, and their hats sat firmly on their wise heads. Men and women of all ages stood around, murmuring in confusion and expectation. Children played at the edges, unaware of the heavy reason behind the gathering. The town crier had gone around with his bell early that morning, shouting that a meeting had been called, one like never before. Most people thought it was a political announcement. Others thought it was a land issue. But when they saw the name on the paper that was passed around, their hearts began to beat faster. It said, Chief Damien Okoro requests to speak publicly to the village elders and the people. Some gasped. Some whispered, "Why now?" Others folded their arms and waited. When Chief Damien finally walked into the square, the murmurs stopped. He was not the man they remembered. He was thinner, weaker, and slower. He no longer wore agbada or gold rings. He wore a plain brown shirt and simple slippers. His face was filled with deep sadness and shame. He walked with the help of a stick, supported by one of the few men who still respected him. He reached the center and stood before the elders. Then, without being asked, he knelt. The entire crowd went silent. This was the same man who once ruled with pride, the same man who chased his brother's wife and child into the rain, the same man who called a widow a witch and stole everything she had. Now he was on his knees before the same people who once praised him. He began to speak. His voice was low and shaky. He started by calling Amika's name, asking for forgiveness from his late brother. He confessed everything. He said he had lied from the beginning, that Amika never left him anything, that Martha never stole from anyone, that Ibuka was never a cursed child. He admitted that he took over the house and the shop by force, lied to the church elders, bribed a pastor to silence Martha, and spread false stories in the village just to destroy her name. He admitted that pride blinded him and greed destroyed him. As he spoke, people in the crowd began to cry. Some covered their mouths in shock. Some elders bowed their heads, ashamed they believed him. Women wept, remembering how Martha was dragged out barefoot, her clothes soaked in the rain, her son crying beside her. A few men removed their caps in silence. Even the wind seemed to pause. When Damien finished speaking, he remained on his knees, waiting for whatever judgment would come. But none came. Instead, from the edge of the crowd, Martha stepped forward. She wore a simple dress and tied a white scarf around her head. Her face was calm. Her eyes held strength. She stood tall, not as a victim, but as a woman who had survived the fire and come out refined. Beside her stood Ibuka, now a man of global impact, but still humble in posture. The people stared at them, amazed at how far they had come. Ibuka walked forward and gently helped his uncle to his feet. He nodded at him, saying nothing, but letting the gesture speak louder than words. Then, with the microphone in hand, Ibuka addressed the crowd. He thanked the elders and the villagers for coming. He said that forgiveness was not weakness, but strength. He said he did not come to shame anyone, but to restore what had been broken. He turned and looked at the old house, the one his father built with sweat and patience. It was broken now. The roof sagged, the windows were empty, the walls cracked. But the memory was still strong. He pointed at the house and told the village that he would rebuild it, not as a private home, not for himself, but as a widow's training and empowerment center. The crowd clapped. He said the center would teach widows how to sew, bake, run small businesses, learn computers, and become strong again. He said it would be named after his mother, Martha, and would carry the spirit of resilience and grace. People shouted in joy. Some elders stood up and began to bless him with prayers. Mothers in the crowd raised their hands and wept with gratitude. Old widows danced with their wrappers tied tightly, singing songs of thanksgiving. It was a new beginning for the village, a turning point. As the crowd celebrated, a young woman walked forward quietly. She had been standing in the background the whole time. She was not dressed richly, and her eyes were heavy with emotion. Her name was Blessing, one of Chief Damien's daughters. She came forward, knelt before Martha, and began to speak. She said she was sorry for what her family did, that she was a child back then and didn't know better, but had now seen the pain they caused. She said she had no job, no hope, no peace, but that she wanted to serve. She asked Martha if she could work in her house, not as a family member, but as a helper. She said she didn't want salary, just a chance to learn and to serve. Martha looked down at her. Then she touched her shoulder gently and told her to rise. Martha said she had forgiven the family long ago, not because they asked, but because carrying bitterness would have destroyed her soul. She reminded Blessing that betrayal comes with a heavy price, and that forgiveness does not remove the wound, it just allows it to heal. She said the best way to honor forgiveness is to live a better life. The crowd listened in silence. It was a moment of deep truth, a moment when pride melted into peace. Ibuka then returned to the microphone. He made a final announcement. He said that Soul Trace had set aside a special fund in memory of Emeka Chiemeka, his late father, and that starting that year, they would give 100 full scholarships to children from poor homes in the village, every year. He said the scholarships would cover school fees, uniforms, books, and feeding, especially for children of widows and those who had been forgotten. The entire village exploded with joy. People shouted, some fell to their knees, others hugged each other and danced. For the first time in a long while, there was light, real light, the kind that starts in the heart and spreads like the sun at dawn. The morning sun rose slowly over the hills of Umuahia. It was a peaceful morning. The air smelled of dew and red earth. Birds flew lazily across the sky, and trees danced gently in the breeze. It was no longer the same village from years ago. Something had changed, something good. Over the past year, Ibuka had returned not only with forgiveness, but with purpose. He built 2 primary schools in the community, modern buildings with clean classrooms, desks, toilets, and solar-powered lights. The walls were painted bright yellow and blue, and the signboards read, "The Emeka Chiemeka Memorial School, built by Soul Trace." Children ran happily through the gates every morning. They wore neat uniforms and carried free school bags filled with books. Most of them were children of widows, farmers, and petty traders. Some had never even owned a pencil before. A clinic also stood proudly beside the market square. Nurses attended to patients. Mothers brought their babies for immunization. There were no more long walks to the next town for treatment. It was free. It was safe. It was open every day. Ibuka also created a small tech hub where youth were trained in digital skills, web design, solar engineering, coding, and graphics. For the first time in the village's history, people were getting jobs without leaving home. It was a complete transformation. One early Saturday morning, Ibuka stood beside his mother in the backyard of their new home. The house wasn't flashy. It was simple but strong and beautiful, like the woman who inspired it. "Mama," he said, looking at her. "Are you ready?" Martha smiled. "Let's go." They got into the car and drove quietly to the village cemetery. When they arrived, the gatekeeper nodded at them with respect. People now recognized Martha everywhere she went. Some called her Mama Billionaire. Others said Mama Light. But her favorite title was the one the children called her, Mama Martha. The car parked under a large tree. Ibuka stepped out and helped his mother down gently. They walked slowly, hand in hand, until they reached a small gravestone at the corner of the cemetery. It was the resting place of Emeka Chiemeka, a kind man, a gentle husband, a loving father. For a moment they both stood in silence. Then Martha knelt beside the grave. Her eyes filled with tears, but they were not the same tears she used to cry. These were tears of peace. "I kept my promise, Emeka," she whispered. "I didn't let the fire burn me. I carried our son like you asked me to. I taught him to pray. I taught him to be kind. And today the world claps for him." Ibuka knelt beside her. He touched the gravestone and smiled softly. "Papa," he said, "we did it. Mama didn't fail you. I didn't forget where I came from." Martha looked at him and placed her hand on his. "I'm proud of you, my son." "I'm proud of you, Mama," he replied. They sat there for a while, just breathing, remembering, healing. A gentle wind passed by as if Emeka's spirit was there, smiling over them. That evening, as the sun began to set over Umuahia, something magical happened. A foreign TV crew had arrived earlier that week. They had heard about a widow who was thrown out and now owned her family's legacy. The cameras rolled through the village, capturing smiling children, healed mothers, rebuilt houses, and stories of hope. They interviewed teachers, elders, widows, and students. One small boy said on camera, "Uncle Ibuka gave me my first shoe." A widow said, "I used to beg for salt. Now I sew clothes and send my son to school." And then the camera turned to Martha. She stood quietly, wearing her white wrapper and soft smile. The wind lifted her scarf gently as she looked into the camera and said, "Pain does not last forever. If you hold on to your faith, even fire can become light." The video went viral. The headline read, "Widow who was thrown out now owns her family's legacy." Across the world, people watched and wept. Letters came from America, Brazil, Kenya, Canada, and beyond. Women sent thank you messages. Orphans sent prayers. Billionaires offered to support the scholarship program. Soul Trace became more than a company. It became a movement of kindness. Back in Umuahia, Chief Damien lived quietly in a small flat behind the church. He no longer wore fine clothes or sat on high tables. He was now a church elder, quiet, humble, always early for prayer meetings. He volunteered to clean the church every Sunday. Sometimes he watered the flowers by the school gate. He no longer asked for praise. He just wanted peace. People no longer feared him. They now saw a man who had fallen, confessed, and changed. And then came the final day. The village had organized a Thanksgiving to celebrate the legacy of Emeka and the rebirth of the community. The church bell rang. Children dressed in bright white clothes danced forward, holding signs that said, "Thank you, Mama Martha." Ibuka the Light. From firewood to fortune. After the service, Martha and Ibuka returned to their house. It was evening. The sun was slowly setting. The sky turned orange, then gold, then soft pink. Martha stood on the balcony, looking out at the playground beside the Widow Training Center. Ibuka stood beside her, a glass of juice in his hand. They didn't speak at first. They just watched. Dozens of children ran around in the compound. Some played football. Others sat under the trees, reading books. A group of girls danced to a song playing from a Bluetooth speaker. Then, suddenly, they all looked up and saw Martha on the balcony. And just like that, they started shouting in excitement. "Thank you, Mama Martha. We love you. God bless you." Tears welled up in her eyes again. But this time, it was not because of pain or regret. It was joy. Ibuka looked at her. "See what you did, Mama." She smiled and squeezed his hand. "No," she said softly. "See what we did." And they lived happily ever after. They threw her out in the rain with nothing but a child and a prayer. But today, the world calls her Mama Martha, the mother of a billionaire, the strength behind a legacy. This story isn't just about riches, it's about resilience, about how a broken widow became a symbol of light, about how the same tree they tried to cut down became the one giving shade to those who cursed its roots. So, before you write someone off because of their pain, poverty, or present, remember, the seed you despise today may become the harvest you'll beg from tomorrow. Thank you for watching, and never forget, grace always wins. Thank you for watching this story on Afro Tales TV. If you enjoyed it, please give it a thumbs up, leave us a comment, and share with friends and family. We have more beautiful stories coming your way, so subscribe and stay tuned. See you in the next one.